always squawking about something. If it isn't a steak, it's something else.
Hollywood's golden age gave us some of the most iconic actors who ever lived. People whose faces defined glamour, heroism, and romance for an entire generation. But some of those same faces were hiding things no studio publicist could spin forever. The crimes, the abuse, the secrets that only surfaced years or decades later. Here are the 10 Golden Age Hollywood villains who turned out to be far more dangerous in real life. Number 10. W.C. Fields. On screen, W.C. Fields was one of the most beloved comedic performers of the 1930s and early 1940s. His persona was the lovable curmudgeon, a man who supposedly hated children, dogs, and everything wholesome. And audiences laughed because they assumed it was an act. It was not entirely an act. William Claude Dukenfield was born on January 29, 1880 in Darby, Pennsylvania. He ran away from home at 11 after a violent altercation with his father and spent years as a juggler and vaudeville performer before Hollywood found him. His juggling was genuinely extraordinary. He had performed it in carnivals and vaudeville houses across the country for 20 years before he became a film star, and the physical precision he brought to the stage followed him to the screen. He was a genuinely extraordinary physical comedian whose ability to construct a comedy scene from almost nothing was widely admired by the same people who found him impossible to work alongside. Off-screen, the misanthropy was not entirely a performance. Fields was genuinely brutal to co-stars, directors, and collaborators throughout his career. He drank constantly. His gin consumption on set was legendary and eventually became a practical obstacle for any production that needed him coherent for more than a few hours at a stretch. He developed a habit of secreting bottles in unexpected locations on sets, in dressing rooms, and in his car, such that the gin could never be entirely removed from the situation, no matter how diligent the crew. He denied paternity of his son, W. Claude Fields Jr., for years. He kept a series of secret bank accounts across the United States, Canada, and Europe under fictitious names, on the theory that money scattered widely enough could never be entirely taken from him. Most of those accounts were never recovered by his estate, because the assumed names were never fully documented. The exact total he had sequestered in fictional identities has never been established. He reportedly fired an air gun at his neighbor John Barrymore over a garden noise dispute. The relationship between Fields and Barrymore was a combustible mixture of genuine mutual admiration and equal contempt. Two men both drinking themselves toward the same destination, with too much self-awareness to pretend they didn't know where they were headed. Fields died on December 25, 1946 at 66, Christmas Day, which many people found appropriately ironic, given his very public contempt for it. Number 9. John Barrymore. John Barrymore was called the Great Profile, a nickname born from the extraordinary geometry of his face, which photographers and directors pursued with something bordering on obsession. Born in 1882 into the most famous acting family in America, his father was Morris Barrymore, and his siblings were Ethel and Lionel, together constituting a theatrical dynasty that defined American performance across 3 generations. John was considered the most gifted of them and the most self-destructive. He made his stage reputation playing Hamlet in New York in 1922 in a production that critics called the definitive American performance of the role. The production ran 101 performances, a Broadway record for Hamlet at the time, and established Barrymore as the leading classical actor of his generation. He transitioned to film and became one of the first genuine screen sex symbols. Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde in 1920, Don Juan in 1926, Svengali in 1931, Grand Hotel in 1932, the films of a man at the absolute top of his profession. Off-screen, Barrymore was a violent, chronically unfaithful, deeply alcoholic man who made the people nearest to him genuinely miserable. He was married 4 times. His third wife, actress Dolores Costello, whom he married in 1928 and with whom he had 2 children, described in subsequent accounts a marriage defined by drinking-fueled rages and behavior that multiple biographers have documented as physically violent. Costello divorced him in 1935. By the late 1930s, his alcoholism had advanced so far that he could no longer reliably memorize his lines. Production companies began placing cue cards around sets, written on the backs of other actors' clothing, on furniture, on any surface he was likely to face during a shot. His later career was a diminishing spectacle of a great talent operating at a fraction of its capacity. He died on May 29, 1942, at 60. Cirrhosis, pneumonia, kidney failure, the accumulated damage of decades. Number 8, Bing Crosby. Bing Crosby was one of the most successful entertainers in the history of American popular culture. Born Harry Lillis Crosby on May 3, 1903 in Tacoma, Washington, he became a recording artist, radio star, and film actor whose combined reach was extraordinary. His 1942 recording of White Christmas sold more than 50 million copies. He won the Academy Award for Best Actor for Going My Way in 1944, playing Father Chuck O'Malley, a kindly, warm-hearted Catholic priest who transforms a struggling parish through gentle charm and human warmth. He was, to an entire generation, the embodiment of all American fatherly decency, which made what came out after his death all the more difficult to absorb. Crosby died on October 14, 1977 at 74 while playing golf in Spain. 6 years later, his eldest son Gary published a memoir titled Going My Own Way. The title, a deliberate reference to his father's most celebrated film, in which he alleged that Bing had been a physically and emotionally abusive father to his 4 sons from his first marriage, Gary, Lindsay, Philip, and Dennis. Gary described a household built around harsh physical discipline and an emotional coldness that left lasting damage across the family. 2 of Gary's brothers corroborated the accounts before their deaths. Lindsay Crosby died by suicide from a self-inflicted gunshot wound in 1989. Dennis Crosby died the same way in 1991. Both had publicly supported Gary's account of their childhood. Philip largely denied the allegations. The children from Bing's second marriage to Catherine Crosby described an entirely different man. Warm, present, attentive. The divided family record has never been reconciled. What is documented is a family that produced, in 2 of its 4 sons, outcomes of permanent despair. The man who played a kindly priest for an Academy Award was not, by his eldest son's account, particularly kind at home. Lindsay and Dennis Crosby are not footnotes to their father's story. They are part of it. Number 7, Joan Crawford. Joan Crawford played women who survived. In film after film through the 1930s, 1940s, and into the 1950s, she portrayed characters defined by endurance, women who clawed their way up from difficult circumstances, who suffered beautifully, and who ultimately prevailed. She won the Academy Award for Best Actress for Mildred Pierce in 1946, playing a devoted mother who sacrifices everything for a daughter who doesn't deserve it. The contrast between that image and what her adopted daughter Christina described is stark. Christina Crawford's 1978 memoir Mommy Dearest alleged a childhood defined by violent physical abuse, psychological cruelty, and a mother whose celebrated public persona had no real connection to the private woman who raised her children. Christina described beatings with wire hangers, forced late-night cleaning rituals, and a domestic environment in which the children existed primarily as extensions of Crawford's public image, rather than as human beings with their own interior lives. Joan Crawford died on May 10, 1977. She did not leave her 2 eldest adopted children, Christina and Christopher, anything in her will, citing reasons which are well known to them. She left the remainder of her estate largely to charitable causes. Joan Fontaine, a contemporary who knew Crawford well, noted after Mommy Dearest was published that among the people who had worked with Crawford throughout Hollywood, the memoir contained nothing that particularly surprised them. The volatility, the need for total control, the cruelty, these were not entirely hidden from the industry that employed her for decades. They were simply not discussed publicly while she was alive and powerful enough to retaliate against anyone who raised them. Number 6. Wallace Beery. Wallace Beery was a big, shambling presence on the screen, a lovable rogue type who won audiences with an air of rough-edged warmth. He won the Academy Award for Best Actor for The Champ in 1931, playing a washed-up boxer whose devotion to his young son drives the film. He shared that award with Frederick March in one of the only tied outcomes in Oscar history. Off-screen, the warmth was entirely a performance. Beery married actress Gloria Swanson on March 27, 1916, which happened to be her 17th birthday. He was 30. In her 1980 autobiography, Swanson on Swanson, Swanson described what happened on their wedding night. Beery came to their hotel room drunk and raped her. The account is specific, detailed, and was written by a woman who had carried the memory for 64 years before setting it on the page. The marriage continued in misery for 3 years. Beery collected Swanson's salary from the studio himself and spent her earnings before she could access them. He was openly unfaithful. When Swanson became pregnant, he coaxed her into taking a substance that induced a miscarriage, having let her believe it was something harmless. Swanson eventually divorced him and went on to one of the most celebrated careers in silent film history. Her performance as Norma Desmond in Sunset Boulevard in 1950 remains to many the finest work in a remarkable professional life. Beery went on to his Oscar-winning career and his reputation as one of Hollywood's most likable character actors. Two of the more trivial topics I never discuss are my marriage to Wallace Beery and those frozen dinners with my name on them, Swanson said decades later, a sentence that managed to be withering and immaculate in the same breath. Number 5. Clark Gable. Clark Gable was called the King of Hollywood for most of his career, and the title was not an exaggeration. From It Happened One Night in 1934, for which he won the Academy Award for Best Actor, through Gone with the Wind. In 1939 and beyond, Gable projected a specific kind of authority the screen had been waiting for someone to embody: easy confidence, a slight edge of danger, fundamental decency underneath it all. He was the most consistently bankable star of his generation. In 1935, Gable and actress Loretta Young were filming The Call of the Wild on location near Bellingham, Washington. Young was 22, Gable was 34, and married to his second wife, Maria Langham. The shoot took weeks in the remote Pacific Northwest. Loretta Young came back from the location pregnant. What happened between them during that production has been characterized differently depending on the source. Young's own account, disclosed to her daughter-in-law in 1998 and confirmed in her posthumously published autobiography, was that she was raped by Gable. Other accounts have characterized it as an affair between adults while acknowledging the considerable power differential involved. Whatever the precise circumstances, Young faced the consequences entirely alone. She went to Europe for the duration of the pregnancy. She returned quietly, gave birth to a daughter named Judy on November 6, 1935 in Venice, California. The baby was placed in an orphanage. 19 months later, Young announced that she had adopted a child, and Hollywood columnists were given a story about charitable generosity toward another woman's baby. The child, Judy Lewis, grew up with her ears surgically reduced to minimize their resemblance to Clark Gable's distinctive ears, because the genetic inheritance written on her face would have made the truth unmistakable to anyone looking closely. She met her biological father once when she was 15, in a brief formal encounter in which neither acknowledged who they were to each other. She wrote about it in her 1994 memoir, Uncommon Knowledge, with a steadiness that must have cost her considerably. Gable never publicly acknowledged her paternity. He died in November 1960 at 59. His only formally acknowledged child, a son from his fifth marriage, was born 4 months after Gable's death and never knew his father at all. Number 4. Roscoe "Fatty" Arbuckle. Roscoe Arbuckle was, in 1921, arguably the most commercially successful comedy star in the world. His contract with Paramount Pictures was worth $3 million, making him the highest-paid actor in Hollywood. And his films had made him one of the most recognized faces on earth. He was a gifted physical comedian who had collaborated with Buster Keaton and built an audience that crossed national borders. On September 5, 1921, Arbuckle and a group of friends traveled to San Francisco for a Labor Day weekend party at the St. Francis Hotel. On September 8th, a 25-year-old actress named Virginia Rapp was found gravely ill in a hotel room. She died 4 days later from peritonitis caused by a ruptured bladder. Arbuckle was charged with rape and manslaughter. The case went to trial 3 times. The first 2 juries were hung. The third trial, in April 1922, ended in acquittal. The jury issued a written statement. Acquittal is not enough for Roscoe Arbuckle. We feel that a great injustice has been done him. We also feel that it was only our plain duty to give him this exoneration. They had deliberated for 6 minutes. But 13 months between the accusation and the final verdict had destroyed everything. Paramount pulled his films from distribution. His name became a national shorthand for Hollywood depravity. The Hays office effectively banned him from appearing on screen. The ban was reversed in December 1922. Theater owners refused to book his films regardless. The case against him had been built largely on testimony from a woman with a substantial criminal record, who later acknowledged fabricating her account. Virginia Rapp had a pre-existing bladder condition that medical evidence linked to her death. None of this was established clearly enough or quickly enough to prevent what was done to him. Arbuckle worked as a director under the pseudonym William Goodrich through the late 1920s. He signed a contract with Warner Brothers in 1933 that seemed to promise a genuine comeback. He died in his sleep on June 29, 1933, the night after signing the contract, of a heart attack. He was 46. Number 3. Errol Flynn. On screen, Errol Flynn was the gold standard of the adventure hero, a man seemingly built to wear a sword, scale a castle wall, and escape every impossible situation at the last possible moment. Captain Blood in 1935, The Adventures of Robin Hood in 1938, The Seahawk in 1940. His films defined a genre, made Warner Brothers a fortune, and produced images of heroic masculinity that a generation of moviegoers carried with them for the rest of their lives. He had genuine athletic gifts. He could fence, ride, and swim with a skill that no stunt double entirely replaced, and a physical ease on camera that made every action sequence look like something that came naturally to him. Born in Hobart, Tasmania, on June 20th, 1909, Flynn had a pre-Hollywood period in New Guinea that his biographers have examined carefully, and that does not reflect well on his character, even before his American legal proceedings began. He had worked as a plantation overseer and a gold prospector there, and accounts from that period describe a man who operated in a colonial environment with the specific combination of entitlement and impunity that the environment provided. He arrived in Hollywood in 1935, was cast in Captain Blood almost immediately, and within 2 years was one of the most bankable stars at Warner Brothers. By 1942, he had made more than 26 films and was among the most famous people alive, playing war heroes on screen while being medically ineligible for actual military service due to tuberculosis, heart disease, and malaria. He attempted to enlist in the Army, the Navy, and the OSS, and was rejected by all three. In October 1942, Flynn was arrested and charged with 3 counts of statutory rape involving 2 teenage girls. Betty Hansen was 17. Peggy Satterlee was 15. The charges related to separate incidents, one at a party in Bel Air in September 1942, one aboard Flynn's yacht Sirocco in the Santa Catalina Channel in August 1941. The trial began on January 11, 1943, and ran for 21 days. Flynn's defense attorney, Jerry Geisler, was one of the most effective criminal lawyers in California, and his strategy centered on discrediting both women's testimonies and introducing evidence that challenged their accounts of specific events. The jury returned a not guilty verdict on February 6, 1943. The courtroom was packed for the full run of the proceedings, and the national press covered it as a spectacle. The cultural aftermath produced something that has never entirely faded. The phrase, "in like Flynn," suggesting easy guaranteed romantic success, entered the American language directly from the sensationalism of the trial. The phrase celebrated the man and dismissed the women who had brought the charges. That framing is part of the story and always has been. Flynn's remaining years were defined by accelerating alcoholism and physical deterioration. He died on October 14, 1959, at 50. An autopsy found physical deterioration typical of a man decades older than his actual age. Number 2, the system that made it possible. Beyond the individual cases already covered, what made Golden Age Hollywood genuinely dangerous was the structure that surrounded these men, a studio system explicitly designed to contain, minimize, and bury exactly this kind of behavior. Studio fixers managed relationships with local police departments. Publicists shaped narratives before they could reach the press. Lawyers controlled what information became public and when. Contracts included morality clauses that were selectively enforced, depending entirely on how commercially valuable the person signing them was to the studio's quarterly earnings. The women who brought accusations found themselves characterized as unstable, predatory, or opportunistic by defense attorneys whose job was to ensure a jury saw the accuser before it saw the accused. Maud Delmont's role in the Arbuckle case, whatever she fabricated or exaggerated, served a purpose that was larger than her individual testimony. She represented a ready-made narrative about women who brought charges against powerful men. That narrative was applied in court after court, in case after case, through the entirety of the Golden Age. The individual cases on this list, Flynn's trial, Chaplin's marriages, Arbuckle's destruction, Beery's 3 years with Gloria Swanson, were each shaped by that structure in different ways. Flynn benefited from it. His defense resources were deployed with a precision and a thoroughness that the teenage girls who accused him could not match. Arbuckle was sacrificed by it when the studios calculated that protecting him would cost more than abandoning him. Chaplin eventually ran into a version of it in his conflict with the federal government, which used his personal conduct as a pretext for what was ultimately a political expulsion. The men whose off-screen behavior most dramatically exceeded the villainy of any screen character they played were also the men with the most power, the most money, and the most invested infrastructure of protection around them. That is not a coincidence. It is a system, and it operated for decades. Number 1, Charlie Chaplin. Charlie Chaplin was one of the most important artists in the history of cinema. His little tramp character, the bowler hat, the cane, the shuffling walk, the enormous expressive eyes, produced some of the most emotionally resonant silent filmmaking ever created. The Kid in 1921, The Gold Rush in 1925, City Lights in 1931, Modern Times in 1936, The Great Dictator in 1940, these were not simply popular films. They were works of genuine aesthetic ambition that cinema scholars have studied for a century. Chaplin was born on April 16, 1889 in London, the son of music hall performers. He emerged from genuine poverty and made himself into one of the wealthiest entertainers in the world before he was 40. He also had a consistent and documented pattern with the women in his personal life that began in 1918 and continued for 25 years, and it was always the same. His first wife, Mildred Harris, was 16 when he married her in 1918. He was 29. The marriage lasted 2 years. His second wife, Leda Gray, was 15 years old when Chaplin first became sexually involved with her. He had known her since she was 8, having cast her in The Kid in 1921. He cast her again in The Gold Rush in 1924, at which point she was 15 and the relationship began. She became pregnant. He faced real criminal exposure under California law for sexual relations with a minor. He married her in November 1924. She was 16. He was 35. The divorce proceedings in 1927 were among the most explosive in Hollywood history. A 50-page divorce document filed by Gray, a copy of which was discovered in an abandoned Los Angeles bank vault and made public by a British antiques dealer in 2016, described sexual demands Chaplin made during the marriage that she characterized as revolting, degrading, and offensive, including acts that were illegal under California law at the time. The settlement was $825,000. At the time, the largest divorce settlement on record anywhere in the world. The legal costs of the divorce came to nearly $1 million. Calls for his films to be boycotted circulated in women's organizations across the country. In 1943, actress Joan Barry filed a paternity suit, claiming Chaplin had fathered her daughter, Carol Ann. Blood tests excluded Chaplin as the biological father, evidence that should have settled the civil case. A judge ruled the blood test results inadmissible. The 1944 jury found against Chaplin, and he was ordered to pay $75 a week in child support until the child turned 21. Medical science was not permitted to override what the jury concluded on other grounds. Chaplin also faced a federal prosecution under the Mann Act in 1944, related to his relationship with Barry. He was acquitted on those charges. He was refused re-entry to the United States in 1952 while traveling in Europe, following government suspicion of his political views and his open criticism of the House Un-American Activities Committee. He settled in Corsier-sur-Vevey, Switzerland, with his fourth wife, Una O'Neill, the 18-year-old daughter of playwright Eugene O'Neill, whom the 54-year-old Chaplin married in 1943. He returned to America only once more in 1972 to receive an honorary Academy Award. The audience gave him a 12-minute standing ovation. He died on Christmas Day, 1977 at 88. The art was real and has endured. The pattern in his personal life, consistent, decades-long, involving very young women, running from 1918 to at least the early 1940s, was equally real and has been part of the public record for nearly a century. Every person on this list was capable of producing work that genuinely moved people. The art that Chaplin and Flynn and Barrymore and Arbuckle and the rest of them produced was real, and in many cases, it has endured far longer than anything else they did. The Little Tramp made people cry in 1921 and still does. Flynn's Robin Hood is still exhilarating. Barrymore's Hamlet was reportedly the definitive stage performance of its era. Arbuckle's physical comedy was extraordinary by any standard. The Champ still lands. But the distance between the image those studios carefully constructed and the reality of who these people were off-screen, with the people who couldn't walk away, who had no studio publicist to call, who had no career to protect their silence. That distance is also part of the historical record. It always has been. What changed over the decades and across generations is our willingness to look directly at it. Gloria Swanson was 17 years old on her wedding night. Virginia Rapp died at 25 and has been a punchline in some tellings of the Arbuckle story for 100 years. The two teenage girls who testified at Errol Flynn's trial had their characters systematically dismantled in a Los Angeles courtroom, while the nation read about it in the newspapers and rooted for the swashbuckler. Lita Gray was 15 years old when Charlie Chaplin first became involved with her, and 16 when he married her. The golden age of Hollywood produced some of the most enduring art in human history, and it was also, for many of the people who weren't the stars, a genuinely dangerous place. Some of the people who were the stars were more dangerous than any character they were ever paid to play. If this kind of Hollywood history is what brings you here, hit that like button and subscribe. There's a lot more of it to tell, and we'll see you for the next one.